So I just wanted to say how Annie and I first came to meet. So I went to the community housing Aotearoa, which is the peak body for the more of the social housing sector, which provides housing with funding. And they had a big conference, and there was many breakout rooms, and one of them was on housing for women. And I've written a report on that, and Annie seems to have a heart for that as well. So we sat next to each other, got to talking. It seems that we have a lot in common, and I was very interested in Kāinga Maha and sharing about this fantastic model that they have. So then I invited her to present. So it's been many months that I've been waiting to share about Annie and Kāinga Maha. So glad we could make it happen this evening. So that is the introductions, and I'm going to now hand it over to you, Annie, to share a little bit about yourself and Kāinga Maha. And if I can ask the rest of you to put yourselves on mute and your videos off, then we can just give the time to Annie, and your comments can go in the chat.
Kia ora, everybody. Ko Annie toka inua no Hungary a Yorkshire, England o ko tipuna ke te nohua ki Rangiora Waitaha tēnā koutou koutou katoa. So kia ora, my name's Annie Wilson. As you can hear from my accent, I am not from New Zealand. I'm originally grew up in Yorkshire. However, actually, my origin is actually Hungarian. So my parents came over in the early 80s, 81, from Hungary as refugees, actually. And so I have a little bit of history, both in my career in the 19 years that I've worked in the social housing space, largely over in England, but actually from my own personal experience. So I moved to New Zealand about 3 years, almost 2.5 years ago. I'm married to a Kiwi, live in Rangiora with my two beautiful girls and our dog, Buddy. But as I say, I am from Hungary by origin, and I really, my essence of who I am is a British Hungarian. So obviously don't sound Hungarian, sound very much from Yorkshire, and I'm very proud of the fact that I grew up, and grateful for the fact that I grew up in Yorkshire, but I'm very much a Hungarian by heart as well. And as I say, my parents came over in 81 and as refugees, and were able to claim political asylum, leaving communist Hungary at the time. And my first experience really of social housing was when my parents were allocated a council house in Little Old Leeds. A 2 up, 2 down council house where I lived as a newborn baby, and with my parents and my older sister and my older brother. My parents knew no English, or very limited English at the time, and really the importance of them finding a home and having a place where they could put down roots and actually start to build their own community, learn the language, get into education, and eventually get jobs, and for us to go to school was a critical factor in our ability to build our life in Leeds. So I think that really drives me, and my desire actually to do the same in my career, being very intentional over the 19 years of working in social housing. And here I am here in New Zealand, and I work for an organisation, as Zola said, called Kāinga Maha. And so it's actually really awesome to hear that there are a couple of you who have already heard of us. So just a wee bit before I delve into my presentation about Kāinga Maha. We were established just over 3 years ago as a not-for-profit developer, and essentially we're committed to helping build communities and ensuring that Kiwis can flourish and meet a variety of housing needs. So we aren't a community housing provider, and nor are we a for-profit developer. We sort of sit in the middle, working both with the private sector, with government, with community housing providers in the local community to build homes and build communities. So we deliver social outcomes, but we actually take a commercial approach to our development. So we're not funded by government in any way, but really use our commercial acumen and understanding of how we unlock the value of land and unlock land to develop housing, but do so in a manner that actually places placemaking at the core and ensures that we have a long-term commitment to the sustainability of places. So our aim is to bring a very holistic approach to development and community creation, but it's certainly not one that can't be replicated across New Zealand and by others as well. So I hope that I inspire you, if not directly, but with your conversations as you leave this evening, to follow suit as well. So as an organisation, we're guided by a number of sorry, I had a pop-up that came up there, so hopefully that's working. We're guided by a number of core values and guiding principles that shape really how we progress our developments. And so first and foremost, as I say, we're a not-for-profit developer, so we place value in people and the needs of people above a financial profit and return. That's not to say that we're completely immune to the financial parameters of development. We need to make our development stack. We need to get finance in order to deliver our projects, but actually we place people above a financial return. And we see that return as something very different to a conventional developer. We build communities. We believe in the principle that actually building communities is more than just once you've created the physical homes, but actually it's more about nurturing and developing that sense of community both before, during, and after our developments are completed, and that communities need to really reflect the diversity that is New Zealand. That's diversity across the piece, so in terms of incomes, tenures, household composition, age, ethnicity. And we believe in the importance that housing needs to be equitable, both in design and its built form and its tenure, and that affordability is actually not just how affordable is a home to purchase or to rent, but more how affordable is it to maintain and to manage, and actually what are the indirect costs of a home, i.e. the costs of transportation, the costs in terms of livability, social connection, impact on health. So not just affordability in a very pure two-dimensional sense. And finally, another key driving principle as to what we do is that homes need to be healthy and they need to be sustainable as well. So Zola's asked me to talk a bit about our approach, and I really centered my presentation tonight on taking a people-centered approach to residential development. We know that in New Zealand there is a housing shortage and a growing need for more homes, but actually we believe that increased production, more homes in of itself is not sufficient. You can't build the successful communities and successful residential developments if all that you're doing is building homes that are driven by and motivated by short-term profitability and a short-term window. So this model has served us badly in New Zealand. I think we can all think of examples local to us where that conventional model has failed to create the homes that we need. It's failed on design and placemaking, poor workmanship, and woefully failed to build the homes that are genuinely affordable to rent or to purchase. So conversely, in essence, the people-centered approach is all about, really, it's quite simple, about putting people at the heart of our decision-making, both in terms of design and the approach to development. And I'm going to just talk through a little bit of how we do that and the approach that we take. So the first step, as I say, is really about putting people first. And how do we do that? We need to first understand the local housing need when we're developing our vision and our strategy for our development and our development proposals. So that means that we need to get a really strong understanding of the local context. What is the socioeconomic data telling us? What is the existing local housing supply? What does that look like? What's the local affordability, and what's being provided and what isn't being provided, and where is that unmet need? This is critical because as I mentioned, the point that New Zealand needs more housing, but it needs the right type of housing. The housing that actually is not seeking to gentrify areas, but actually accommodate and ensure that the new housing is meeting local people's housing needs. The next key part of understanding the local housing context is actually enabling us to really understand what does that mean in terms of tenure. So as a not-for-profit developer, we develop housing across what we call the housing continuum in the housing world, so which is really looking at housing as an ecosystem, and so considering, based on our understanding of the local housing need, what proportion or what type of housing needs to be rented at an affordable price or at social rents. What housing needs to be designed and delivered to meet a particular need or age cohort or typology, and what is the unmet need for those critical workers who would never be afforded housing if seeking to get an allocation through the public housing register, but can't afford to rent or can't afford to purchase, but are integral in supporting the economic strength of an area. So it's really flipping that approach to development to not just a commodity, housing seen as a commodity, but actually housing seen as a key piece of community infrastructure. And so when you think of housing in this manner, actually you consider how across the housing continuum and across this ecosystem, how we need to be meeting the needs of a variety of different people. And equally recognizing the importance of doing so isn't just because it's the right thing to do, but actually across our journey and career in our housing world, or based on the age or stage that we're at in life, we may need to switch across to the different tenures. Often that can happen due to circumstance and factors outside of our control. Sometimes it could be choice, the need to downsize, or the need to temporarily move somewhere because of work. And so all we may be seeking is good quality, secure tenure, rental accommodation. And so really this notion of a people-centered approach is thinking about housing in a really organic continuum ecosystem type manner. And the next key ingredient, in our opinion, to taking a people-centered approach is really thinking about how we collaborate with the local community. So often the local community just have to accept new developments that happen in their neighbourhoods. And actually, from our perspective as a not-for-profit developer with people at the heart of what we do, actually this is not about tick box approach or a regulatory requirement where there may be one to consult with the community, but actually it's about considering in our mahi as a developer in developing new homes on a new subdivision or on a new piece of land, how can we look at creating value that goes beyond securing resource consent or going beyond building homes, but actually ensures that the local people and the local community flourish as a result of it. And this is so important because so often we impose our own ideas, don't we, on what good places look like and what is the right type of community to create and how we can tackle complex social issues. But in fact, by us just making those assumptions and not talking to the community, in my view and experience, actually we run the risk of displacing the very people whose needs we're seeking to meet. So really this is, as I say, not a tick box approach. This is really integral in us building successful places and giving a voice to those groups and people that are underrepresented to really understand what that community is missing, what are their local priorities, how do we build resilient communities, build long-lasting relationships with community champions or local businesses or schools or the local community to understand who we need to collaborate with, who we need to be working alongside and partnering with to drive social and economic change. And the benefits of doing this I've put on the slide are really manifold, and actually very often it can make commercial sense to do so as well. So amongst other things, by collaborating with the community, you can really develop that that sense of belonging and build connections with both the new community, new residents that are living there, with us as the developer and the existing residents and community that we're serving. It can build local agency. Often there are, very often, in fact, there are local community champions or residents who really have a heart to improve the places that they live, and maybe have for generations lived in a place and seen some issues that have developed, but don't know how to be mobilised. And actually, as a developer coming in and giving a platform and partnering, it can really be really effective to give agency. And it can create that sense of identity and that real pride in place, both for the existing and for future residents, and actually strengthen the local economy and build resilience as well. And the key kind of premise and importance of taking this people-centered approach is this understanding that each and every one of us is actually shaped by property and real estate. It touches every aspect of our life, doesn't it? And every aspect of each human that lives on planet Earth, and how we connect with others, how we work, how we play, how we socialise. And so there really, in our opinion, there really is no excuse for not adopting good design and thinking in your design, in your master plans, about how you create community and how you put people at the heart of those communities, rather than how you cram, rack and stack more developments in, but actually create that sense of belonging. And that's a really integral piece of how we approach our developments. And so that can take many forms. Each master plan and the kind of key parameters for good urban or medium density or rural places or communities is really actually determined by the local context. And that what I have understood in my years of as a developer and wearing different hats, I've worked for local government, I've worked for the equivalent to community housing providers in England, I've worked in consultancy at the early stages where we're looking at plan changes and looking at community rezoning land for residential housing. And there really are a number of kind of key parameters in my experience that stand out as being key to good developments, and that need to be really nurtured by architects and developers to ensure that we're taking that people-centred approach. And the first is just really simple, that these places get better in time. So often developers come in, they develop, they sell, or they rent, and then they walk away. But actually we need to be thinking not just about that first occupancy, but future generations and how these places will be enjoyed. We need to be building in and designing in cohesion. So often where there is a mixture of tenures, so affordable and social housing through to private sale housing, you can really see across the piece which homes for which tenure. We believe in the principle of mixed and tenure blind. So where we are developing and ensuring there's no differentiation in terms of materiality and in terms of design and space and configuration of our different typologies and houses across the tenures, and really ensuring that often we talk about tenure blind, but then the social housing could be sort of tucked away next to the power lines or the pump station or the busy roads, but actually ensuring that there's the real pepper potted and its integrated approach to the variety of different tenures, and ensuring that, as I say, we're designing in cohesion rather than differentiating between the haves and the have-nots. A key important ingredient and parameter in terms of looking at your master plan is actually thinking about evoking that sense of belonging. And this can look different in different types of developments as well. But it's primarily about giving the ability for residents to personalise their surrounding spaces, room to build community with their neighbours. It's important as well to really engender security and safety, avoiding your high walkways, poorly overlooked spaces, ensuring good lighting and natural surveillance. And these are all things that, unfortunately, sounds probably very simple for me to say, but actually are often missed. And thinking about those shared spaces as well, the relationship to the street, gardens, corridors, if there are in an apartment setting, thinking about these places and understanding that they're places that actually shape the way that we meet and greet and relate to our neighbours, and really have the power to either enhance those relationships or quite often test them. And so really thinking about the master plan and these concepts and parameters is so critical. And stewardship, so important, as I say, rather than just a short-term mentality to development, but thinking about the long-term implications and understanding what this means in terms of the design, material choice, workmanship, how easy places are to maintain and manage, and diversity, ensuring our places are reflective of the diverse nature of New Zealand, and the space between the buildings. And this is something that quite often is missed, both for medium high density, but also increasingly the normal density that we find in some of the subdivisions here in New Zealand, and thinking about, where are people going to be parking, and where will people how will people go to the bus stops, and where are the pedestrian routes and easy access ways outside of a new subdivision, where are the places to play, and ensuring that we're blurring the lines and the hierarchy between the pedestrian and the car. I think this is something that in New Zealand we love our cars, and we need them quite often, don't we, in places where the public transport isn't well served by public transport. But actually we could do so much more than designing in car parks, but thinking about how people will be moving in our spaces, and building to that human scale as well. So ensuring that we're really carefully treating that relationship with the street or that wider community, ensuring that we've got active frontages, and that we're really thinking about the simple functions of where we put our washing out, where we put our rubbish, and how we receive our visitors that come in or receive our post. Really simple things, but actually so often missed. And marrying that privacy with density as well. We are increasingly building to a higher density in New Zealand, and have to really, in a lot of context, to ensure that homes can be affordable, and that we can make the numbers viable so that developments can proceed. But there's a really important balance between surveillance and privacy, and that means that we've got to be really careful about fence treatments, front gardens, balconies, to ensure that we're building cohesive communities. And finally, this is a particular pet hate of mine, and we see it so often, time and time again, is just thinking about your bins, avoiding that rubbish design, thinking about where are my bins going to be located, how can they discreetly be designed in, where perhaps they need to be at the front of a property, but also be in a real practical location as well, particularly for a medium high density setting. So I'm not sure how I'm getting on with time, Zola, because my timer kind of stopped working. But if you guys want to contact me, if you're interested in hearing more, I'd love to share my ideas, and answer any questions that you may have.
That's fantastic. Great timing. It is now the Q&A. You've ended exactly on time. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much. And I'm sure folks do have a lot of questions. So now's the time you can unmute yourself and put your video on, and either raise your real hand or your virtual hand. And let's have about 10 minutes of questions for Annie before we go into our breakout room.
Thank you. That was great. I really resonated with your housing as an ecosystem principle. I think that's really spot on. And just wondered whether kind of within that, that kind of kaupapa, how do you integrate, sustainable materials? Like how far do you push sustainability in the actual design? And I'm not only talking about buildings, but you mentioned the life between buildings, which is always important, but quite often, especially in more intensified contexts, it often means concrete between houses. And so I just wondering, like, how do you take this into consideration? How far do you push those principles?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you, Magda. So we, as an organisation, we build to now a minimum home star 7. So we had our previous development that was completed just over a year ago, 84 homes, where we had a mixture of social housing. So 28 of the homes were for social rent, working in partnership with Home Foundation and some community housing providers, Emerge, Aotearoa and Christchurch Methodist Mission. We had around a third of the homes were sold to first home buyers deliberately to make them more affordable, and then the remaining homes were sold for private sale. And at the time, we took the choice with the social rented accommodation actually to build to Homestar 7 and the other 10 years to be Homestar 6. And of course, we have now noticed such an improvement in the quality and the comfort of those homes. And in fact, we've installed some devices called a tether device that really monitors how the homes are used, how they perform, both in terms of moisture levels, damp, the temperature transfer across the property. And it's really convinced us that actually Homestar 7 is the minimum. And whilst I think the Homestar rating isn't particularly perfect, it is at least a helpful proxy for us to understand how we're performing and versus the building code. But really, we're looking to grow and improve our practice. So our next development, we recognised again, it's a very different context. It's in more of an urban setting. It's a brownfield site, 63 homes. Really well connected, and we've actually reduced our car parking ratio, which is a little bit brave here in New Zealand. So it's not 1-for-1 parking, we've got below that, and we've actually got EV charging on all of our car parking spaces, and are hoping, if we can get the economics to work, to have some sort of car share as well, so to really improve alternative modes of transport. In terms of the fabric first approach, we tend to use at the moment, based on the types of projects that we've developed, timber frame, conventional standard construction methodologies, but we're looking as well at alternatives. It's just, we often have to manage that balance of viability and affordability. And so, but again, we take that whole of life cycle approach to our development. So do an assessment on our typologies, not just thinking about materiality and choices at that construction stage that will maybe reduce our carbon footprint, but actually the long term, how affordable and what's our carbon footprint for the duration that these homes will be here and how they will be run and maintained. So we're hopeful that that extends to alternative heating sources as well, if we can get the viability to work, and just hopefully improve our approach as we continue.
Wonderful. Thanks. We have a hand up from Indigo. Go ahead and ask your question.
Look, I just had a question about, so I'm from the Kapiti Women's Tiny Home community. We're trying to achieve essentially a smaller space of living. So have you ever considered, or is there a consideration for tiny homes, fixed tiny homes? That would be obviously legal, have to meet the building code. Is that a consideration? And what would your price, if we said we had $350,000 to spend on our own home, is that something you'd do if we all fit the same mould and all decided that we would want to spend this amount on a smaller property? Just putting it out there.
Yeah, it's a good question. So Kāinga Maha, we're both a developer, so we develop our own communities, but we also help others to provide development management services. And so often there's always this tension between minimum space standards, especially where there's a requirement for funding. So there's minimum gross floor areas versus how affordable we can make things. Now, we don't believe that affordability necessarily means making things smaller and cheaper to build. I think that there's a element and a need for that, but actually affordability goes way beyond that. But actually we are going through, sorry, keep on moving, so on my screen, but we are going through a process to really understand how do we balance, well, when we're developing our own developments, the need to make our homes as affordable as they can be in terms of price, but also really comfortable places to live. So thinking cleverly around our typology layouts. And so where we may have a townhouse configuration, thinking actually what room is important, what space is important, actually what is important for that family, is it storage rather than actually just 2 living spaces. So yes, it in some ways we do look at smaller homes, and there's definitely a space for that, but it's about balancing how that home will be used, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I think some of our women are looking at their lifetime and what it would look like in the future. And, you can only look so far as the news or, see how our elderly are being treated, to only wonder how we're going to be treated as we age. So some of us aren't looking for the 3 or 4 bedroom homes. Some of us are looking for smaller dwellings. When I say smaller dwellings, it doesn't have to be a tiny home per se, but there are some good options that might be a 2 bedroom home that, may just fit the little community that we are trying to bring together. So yeah, we're considering a lot of things at the moment. Thank you very much for your kaupapa and the work that you're doing to move that forward. I'll let someone else who might have a question go.
And just to answer that as well, I mean, I talked around the principle of first understanding your housing context, and that's absolutely a key point. So often we make an assumption where we look at the housing need and the data, and it says it would bring the conclusion that we need more 3 bedroom homes or 4 bedroom homes, but actually we haven't delved deeper and seen that there's an increased trend perhaps in under-occupied family housing that could be released if there is an adequate supply of good quality smaller accommodation that would enable a downsizer to move and still live in a really comfortable home. So it's thinking holistically. I absolutely agree.
I suppose it would just depend on where we are in our journey too. I'll let Sue. She's got her hand up.
Kia ora, Ethel.
Well done.
Hey, I'm also from the Kapiti Women's Tiny Home Community. Thank you, Zola, by the way, for joining me up at the last minute. So yeah, I set up the Kapiti Women's Tiny Home Community because I wanted, as an aging woman, I'm really clear that I want to live in a small space, but I want to have caring people around me, and I want my own privacy. And I'm a little bit green, and I plan to get greener as I age. So I don't want a huge place, I am in a tiny flat now, and I'm the happiest I've ever been, as long as I've got a decent view and nice people around me. So yeah, I'm a bit. So I just wanted to say, from my perspective, there is a huge need. Within a week of putting out to the tiny home groups that we were setting up Kapiti Women's Tiny Home for women wanting disability and aging proof tiny homes, we had 62 people join up. That's just within a week, and that's quite a lot in our little old country, and we haven't even gone on to the community groups. So I just wanted to kind of have a voice for people with disabilities and people who are aging, who don't have a lot of money, but have a lot of community building skills, because God, we've had to develop them. Sorry, that's a long, I haven't really got a question. I'm just kind of thinking, who can we go to say, some of us have got a deposit, some of us are working, we want to build a community that works, not just for aging women, but, I would love to be able to offer social housing for someone, because I've worked in the community all my life. Sorry, not just rambling. I'm going to shut up because I'm going off topic.
No, that's fine. I'll take one more question from Jerome, and then I've got breakout rooms for us to go into. So please do stick around for us to be able to be in small groups for about 10 minutes. Jerome, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. That was an interesting comment from Rostrons. I'm not sure what. Just in the terms that, we have a hell of a lot of assumptions and business as usual. We had kind of around planning, consents, expectations. You've mentioned car parking and things like that. It's just, and it's all loaded onto these objects that we design. So it's incredibly challenging if you want to try and shift a little bit. And so just sort of building on that, with the Hobsonville community, when they do their surveys, the consistent number one thing that people like about Hobsonville is the walkway around the outside, and they get to interact, they get to exercise, they get to see the views, they kind of get a sense of place and things like that. And I was just thinking about that and thinking, so you've talked a little bit about the functional side of your housing and the sustainability and how you build them and stuff. How do you evaluate some of the other things that you've said are very important to you in terms of the outcomes, and whether you have or not, what do you instinctively, whether you have done that sort of like evaluation or reflection on it, what is working and what do you need to do more of? What's challenging you the most to integrate into your projects that you'd really like to see more of, I guess is my question. Thank you.
Gosh, that's a brilliant question. I could write another presentation, I think, on that. I mean, we are a not-for-profit developer, and so whilst we have some flex in terms of making the numbers stack versus a conventional developer who needs to hit a certain return, we are very constrained financially. Because when you're building social housing, because it's the right thing to do and what a community needs, your what we call gross development value of a development diminishes. And so we have to really sweat the numbers. So I think the biggest challenge that we have is viability. The community creation piece is actually really simple. If you take this approach where you're genuinely seeking to put people at the centre and build communities, then your behaviours change, don't they? Because you're driven by that outcome. But it's access to land that will be can be brought forward in a sustainable way. And the second key component as well is capital and finance as well, and ensuring that we've got that patient capital. Because the conventional approach is driven by short-term, short-sighted returns, but actually a lot of these communities need that patient capital in order to be created, so that value proposition is different, but actually is, in my experience, greater. But when you take a longer term patient perspective on when you get your return, and so then that enables you to make the right decisions when you're progressing your resource consent around the master plan creation and design, around car parking, because you're not driven by what's going to sell my homes the quickest. So yeah, I think they're the two things, and also I mean we as an organisation are only young. We've been in existence for 3 years, but we're looking at how we can seek to quantify with Home Foundation, an organisation we work really closely with and who fund us a lot of the time with our developments, and how we can actually understand that social value creation bit. So working with very clever folk who have got the ability to design tools and really help us really quantify, okay, by creating and building social housing, the impact, the social value that we created can be quantified, so we can really articulate the power of taking this approach as well. So nothing to be able to tangibly say other than, like, I suppose, instinctively knowing this is the right way to do development, and seeing through my experience and through the experience of many others who have followed this approach, that it's the way to build great communities. But we're hoping we'll be able to articulate that in a much more effective way.
Right. Thanks, Annie.
Thank you. I actually have a tool that I might, I'll share it with you, Annie. It's an eco-village assessment tool, but there might be things within it, even though you're not making eco-villages, it does actually outline a lot of the values and outcomes. It also bases it off of the SDGs. So that's a tool I'll share with you. That might be something to form a basis for what you're looking for in terms of evaluation of social impact. So thank you all for coming. So here's my closing. I got it off of a resource that I have that makes available openings and closings. So this one is: take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone.